We obviously will be recording this session at our end, but just if you're joining us through the Zoom session, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera function. That will also give you a better reception. And if you have to unmute yourself, please do it right at the end of the session, when you can also ask questions. And if you have questions in between, you can put in your questions in the chat function of Zoom, or if you are joining us through live streaming, please put it in the chat function of the live streaming. Every question which you put in live stream, we usually copy paste it into the Zoom, and then we ask those questions at the end to the speaker. So don't worry, your questions will be answered no matter where you put it, but just put it in the chat function. Or if you want to ask the question personally, that's also an option, which you can unmute your microphone right at the end of the session and ask your question directly. And please do not take any screenshots, and please do not record the session. We will be recording the session. We've taken the permission from Eden to do that, and we will be sharing it through our YouTube channel, which if you are actually following our LinkedIn community, which is called Design You. If you don't have the link, just request us for it. We'll send it in the sharing, the link in the chat function. You can join that, but you will find that the recording shared later on in that community group, and also on YouTube. You can maybe a day or two later, you'll find it over there. So these are basically just the basic ground rules. And please do not ask any sensitive or confidential information to the speaker. That's the only few things to note. Just to quickly also introduce you all to Eden. She is the design lead at LF Labs, and she's a design leader and practitioner of design, obviously. She's been working on financial products and services for business, and hence her session is about B2B design services in Singapore and Asia. She's also helped to lead the creative team at LF Singapore, and empowers other designers, writers, and researchers to push their creative boundaries and exchange ideas among themselves, so that they are grounded in feasibility. So I would like to welcome again Eden and everyone else. Thanks for joining this session. Over to you, Eden. Please take over. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Sanchita. I hope you guys can hear me because it's a little bit noisy on my end in the office today. Feel free to let me know if I need to slow down or speak a little bit more clearly at this point. If not, then I think I will take over the screen and start sharing. Right, so thanks everyone for joining me today. I hope you will get some useful insights from today's session. So I think I'll start with a little bit about me first. Today I'm talking about designing with purpose, and I'm thinking about, after having worked in the industry for a few years, we're always listening to a lot of client requirements. We want to make better work, right? And then you start hearing a lot of different feedback from different stakeholders and users and a lot of different people, and that makes you think a lot about, that impacts a lot of the decisions that you make for your design. So I think, how do we start to decide what kinds of decisions we should make in our design? I think, in my opinion, I'm going to share with you my experience and how we want to design with purpose. So a little bit about me first. I'm grounded in design, and also a lot of my past experience with my clients have been with financial institutions like the banks, some government agencies in Singapore. And primarily I work a lot on B2B services, especially for small and medium enterprises, but also sometimes attached to larger businesses. So I think a lot of what I will be talking about today is also through the lens of designing financial products, designing all these B2B services for them. And I would like to say that at the end of the day, after working with all of these different clients. I come from an agency, right? So going through a lot of these different projects with different clients, I think the main question that we keep asking ourselves, or they keep asking us, is how do we help our customers who are businesses to grow? Like a lot of these B2B services are trying to help businesses to grow more, um, which is quite different from, say, like a B2C service that's trying to sell more products. But we are trying to serve the businesses at this point. So there's a separate group from, there's a separate mindset that we approach compared to trying to speak to a consumer like you and me. So a little bit about today's content. I think four main topics that I did want to cover on under this umbrella. So firstly, I think we want to ask ourselves like what's important to a business. We want to try and understand who are we designing for? And in this case, what's important to them? And from there on, then we start to think about who's involved in the business and who are the people who are going to start touching your products. Um, and as part of that, how do we actually think about B2B user persona? It's a little bit different from designing for a single consumer. And also then from there, how do we start to design your product for that? So I think firstly, so I'm just gonna ask like what's important to a business, right? The answer actually is pretty simple, and that's money. So I know like maybe you're gonna ask like, oh, why are you telling me this? As an individual, I'm also concerned about money in my own life. I want to manage my own personal finances. Can I afford to do this? Can I afford to take a cab to work this morning? Um, those sort of things, like, yeah, it is unfortunately perhaps a very capitalist way that we approach things. Um, but for businesses, I think why it's important is actually that fundamentally a business is responsible for their people, the people that they employ. And I guess like it's the way that the world works right now is that businesses actually need the money to stay afloat. So they need money to hire people, they need money to buy the resources, their supplies, and then start producing their products and delivering their services to their customers. So for a lot of our business users or our target audience, I would say that money is quite an important pillar of what they are trying to do. And therefore, it means like they're trying to get to profit making operations. And in this case, or rather in the B2B design world, I think we talk a lot more about money in the in the form of cash flow. Like that's the kind of terms that they keep bouncing around, right? So I'm just going to show a quick design that I did before. We talk a lot about cash flow and what is cash flow, right? What why do businesses need to care so much about it? So essentially, this cash flow shows the money in versus the money that's going out, and overall as a business, am I making more profits this month? And so for a business owner, what's important is to see that your cash flow is constantly positive so that you have money to keep going, you have money to buy supplies, to pay your people. And as such, for a lot of business owners, I think what they really need to see is this overview of their cash flow. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Is it going into the negatives? And as part of that, was it an intentional set of decisions that led to this? For example, if as a business I decide that I'm buying a new office or I'm buying a lot of furniture for my office this month, and therefore my cash flow may be going down for this particular month. But as an overall trend, it should be going up. And if it's not going up, then that's where you start to diagnose the different issues. Like, is it a resourcing problem? Do I have enough customers? Um, is it a lack of manpower? Or so on and so forth. Like that's where things start to get into the details. So for this product, in this case, I was designing for the UOB SME app. And what we identified here for what was unique about this particular one was that the con the audience, our users, were actually SME owners. And what makes them different is that for a lot of SME owners, they don't necessarily know very well how to manage their business. So this is in comparison with, like, say, a large MNC, where business owners, your bosses are probably like 20, 30 years into business. They understand how to make things work. They have lots of teams under them that are managing the nitty-gritty details as well. So in this case, as an SME owner, a lot of them actually start with small dreams like, hey, I really want to, like, my friends give me positive reviews about my cupcakes, so I'm gonna start selling cupcakes on Instagram, and then it starts to blow up, and then I have to start managing a business, right? So it could be people like you and me who end up being SME owners, um, and of course that and barrier to entry gets very high for them. So the approach to designing for SME owners is really different from designing for owners of a large business, for example. So I'll go a little bit more into detail later on as well. Um, but meanwhile, I think as part of my journey, especially designing fintech products, I came from a background that has absolutely nothing to do with finance. So working with banks, working with all these different fintech companies, there are a lot of new terms like buyer and supplier, accounts payable, supply chain financing, all of these different things. It gets very confusing. But I, along this whole process, I think Investopedia is my best friend. Um, every time I have no idea what are these terms that I'm hearing, I just Google it. I go onto Investopedia and read a lot more about it. And that be I think the point is that going into a new industry, designing for whichever industry you're in, find your best friend to start explaining all the details to you. So I think moving on into then what who's involved in the business. And as part of this, we want to identify who we're actually designing for. There are a lot of different roles in a business, and I think this is where things start to be really different for B2B products versus B2C products. Um, so in a business, you have a lot of roles. For example, you have like a managing director, you have accountant, you have head of ops, you have maybe a salesperson, maybe designers like myself. So all these different people, and they all play very different roles and have very different responsibilities. So what makes a way to start approaching all these different roles is this is something very common in especially in financial products. We have what we call the maker and checker, as well as the decision maker. So what this means is that the maker is typically your lower level executives, the team members, but they could also be someone who's at a senior level. Essentially, what they do is they are the ones carrying out a specific action. For example, they're the ones filling in an application form. Um, and then what happens in a business is usually you then have someone else who comes in and checks the form. So then you have the middle, the checker role, typically more of the manager, someone a bit more senior. Um, and their role is just to look at things and approve stuff, and rather than being the ones who fill in the form. And then lastly, you also have the decision makers. And this is a very different role. They may not be the ones doing the day-to-day, all the small little details of filling in the forms. Maybe what they just need to do is decide that, hey, okay, you know what, my company is going to apply for this grant. Now, then the admin person is going to be the maker and start filling in that form. So these three different roles, very distinct, and therefore the design for each of them becomes really different. So I think as part of that, we'll start to see that in different types of companies, the roles overlap, and also the number of roles also change accordingly. When you go to a micro business on the left side, this is probably like um like I said, right, your Instagram cupcake owner. It could be like a one person business who's managing everything, and you are simultaneously the maker, the checker, and the decision maker all at once. And this is where you look at something and you decide that, hey, okay, I want to apply for this grant. I'm going to spend my time filling in this form and submit it. So this is very close to like a B2C experience where I am the user. I just put myself in the user's shoes and think that, okay, this is probably a good experience. This makes sense. I, I just need it to be fast, but I have all the knowledge in my head and it's done. But as we grow towards a larger business, like a small business, for example, you might have multiple makers. So, for example, you would have a finance person, you have an admin person, um, and then maybe like a person, a designer, for instance. And these are the makers. And then you would then have their boss, who's like a checker. And this could be the checker and decision maker all at once as well. So now you have two separate roles. Um, Someone's doing the form, and then someone's going to review and decide that yes, let's proceed. And as you go further up as well, into a medium or a large business, these roles start to get a lot more distinct as well. And what this means is also that in each maker role, each executive begins with a very, very specific role. So, for example, in a banking application, if you have a finance team in a very large MNC, typically you would have someone who's in charge of payroll. Then you would have another function who is dealing with making payments to your suppliers. And also there's another function who's called the receivables team, and they deal with collecting payments. So then these three different functions, in a small business, maybe it's one finance executive who deals with everything, but in a large company with many different many different customers, you would have a dedicated person at each track, and they only get to see a very specific set of things when they fill in their form. Meanwhile, this also means that the decision makers likely don't have the time to come and check every single form. Most of the time, what they do is they just look at an overall and the overall status of the business and decide that, okay, based on our numbers today, we are going to start creating a new product. Let's invest in this new direction. So the financial decisions that they make or business decisions that they make are growing towards growing the company. And that has absolutely nothing to do with filling in the form. So when it comes to designing for these products, then you start to think about, okay, if I'm going to test this banking application with my users of our business, who am I testing it for? If I ask the CEO, if I manage to find a CEO as a user and he's going to come in and look at the application form, whatever kinds of feedback he's going to say is not as applicable as the person who's actually filling in the form. So this is why in designing for B2B customers, you have to start looking at the size of the business and also what are the roles that people play in their business and how their feedback might actually affect what you what insights that you collect. Do you have to exclude those insights because maybe they are not quite the right target user for this particular feature? So then that might have been a lot of layers to think about. So I'm going to introduce this framework of how to approach B2B personas. So essentially, there are two layers when you start looking at B2B, a user of your product, which is one, you have the business layer and also the user layer. So if I focus a little bit on the business aspect, I think I just covered a bit about business sides, right? But we also have a few other aspects that I like to think about. For example, the industry, the geography of where the business is based, or where they are located in as well, and also the maturity of the business, like what type of business are they, how experienced are they, how many years have they been in business as well. And then, so having covered the whole business layer, then now you start to look at the specific user themselves, their age, who are they, um, what role do they play in the company, and also things like their individual preferences. So if I talk a little bit more about business industry and why is this important, um, so industries affect how the business operates. So, for example, you have a retail industry, a business in the retail industry, like your everyday shop. You walk on the street, you go shopping, and there's just this one little shop right there that's selling you your favorite souvenirs. And what this means is that maybe you go and you get a product and you say that, okay, I'm gonna buy this item, and you pay in cash, you pay with your card, and that's it. The payment goes from you to the business directly. It's almost immediate. When in comparison, you have things like these huge shipping companies where they deal with logistics or trade, for example. Payments are not as immediate. How it works is there are a lot of things like you have the buyer who says that, okay, all right, I'm gonna buy one entire cargo container of clothes, for example, and I want you to ship it onwards. And as part of that, for we know that shipping from one place to another takes so many days, it takes so much time that the arrangement of payment is actually it takes a much longer time, right? You have maybe a 30-day or 60-day period to pay up. So once the goods are delivered, then you have that invoice to say that, okay, I'm gonna pay you in 60 days time. And this means that the business does not actually have the cash on hand to do other things. So technically technically the money belongs to them, but they haven't the money in their bank account has not gone up yet. So this means that they're at this they don't have the amount of money that they need to pay their employees, for instance, that they need to have like they need to draw on a buffer or like their past savings to make sure that okay, we have money to do certain other things. So the difference between these kinds of businesses where you have more direct instant payments versus invoice payments means that the money transfers that go between companies, it also takes time and it affects their business operations and what they can or cannot do if they have that money or not. So on top of that, then you'll also look at things like are there any unique needs or trends in their industry? I think one of the key examples is during COVID when you have things like food services, all those in-person services that the airline industry, they were all suffering quite badly. And the way you would design products and services for them is very different. The kind of messaging, the way that you talk to them is really different compared to, say, like the IT and digital industries that were growing like crazy during COVID. So looking at how looking at a business industry would also affect how you design for them, or in fact, like which kinds of industries you're going to serve as well. Do you look at that specific industry or also the businesses in what I would call parallel industries, like logistics and trade? Yeah, similar in the parallel industries. So another angle of looking at dealing with business design for businesses is also geography. So I'm based in Singapore, right? And we know that Singapore as an economy is very well developed. And but we're sitting in this region of Southeast Asia of growing economies. And it's very easy to say that, okay, designing for a product for Singapore, but you should do XYZ. Like everyone's very advanced. You get like fast Wi-Fi download speed. So we should put in a lot of images, videos to make things, the interface look a lot more exciting. Um, but then you start to look at the region. And I think for those of you who work with regional designing products for the region, you'll also realize this, right? Having something in the same product in Singapore doesn't always work the same way as it would for Vietnam or Indonesia or like some of these other countries around us. Um, on one hand, it's things like your economic development of each particular country, but you would also look at things like what I have here is, for example, the number of competitors that you actually deal with. So this is from Google Bard. I I would take it with a pinch of salt on what exactly the figures are, but essentially you get the gist that in Singapore you start with we have what 288,000 SMEs alone. And it sounded like such a big number when I first approached a project and got to this number. I was like, wow, 288,000. And then I started looking at other businesses in other regions where you have like Vietnam, number of SMEs and MSMEs is close to 1 million. And that sounds like quite a crazy number until I got to India. And it was like, I think the client that I worked with was like, if we just take 1% of the share of the market share in India, that is a huge number. And 1% of 63 million, that's what, 600,000, that's already more than Singapore alone. So just thinking about um, geography, like it's not just about cultural differences, but also the sheer number of competitors, the size of the audience that you're working with. Who do you even talk to? When you talk about 1%, if you're trying to talk to 1% of this audience, like how big and how different are they even? For example, if we're talking India, it could be, are we talking about the really rural villages? Or are we talking about the tier one cities that are pretty much, that have that very advanced way of working as well? So I think geography, if you get the chance to start looking at businesses across different regions, I think that's where you also start to see that it also plays a huge part in how you design for them, not just in terms of cultural differences, but where they where your target audience stands in the whole that entire sea of fishes essentially. So another angle I would talk about is business maturity. So on one hand, you can think about it as startups where you have very specific types of needs. So for tech startups, you would have you go down the route of say accelerators and incubators. You look for someone to invest in you, and there's this whole separate network of support for them. And the way that you would approach designing for them is really different. I think the kind of goal of startups, generalizing here, it's like to become like a unicorn, right? And get really well known, get listed on like the stock markets, and so on and so forth. Um, but then so that's one angle. If you're designing for a startup versus a huge unicorn company, that's also very different ways to approach it. Um, and then on the other hand, if you're dealing with uh, something less shiny, you're just doing a very simple business as a freelance photographer, as a freelance um, cupcake baker, for example, versus, or you're going out to say that I'm going to open a shop and sell my stuff. this is very different. This also has a very different mindset and approach of how do you want to manage your business? What kind of support do you need? Do I need to go and find a physical store and to sell my products in? Should I list it online? Um, or if I'm trying to start like a logistics company, how do I get, say, my fleet of trucks or cars and vans to carry on that business? So the different, if I'm starting versus I'm trying to grow my business as a business that's more mature, there will also be a lot of different ways to approach and design and think about what is the message you want to deliver to them. So that's for business. And I think going into the user side of things, I think a lot of us would be a lot more familiar with this aspect. Like you talk about demographics, for example, like which are you a Gen Z or a boomer person? What kinds of generational traits do they have? What kinds of attitudes are specific to each generation as well, and how does that carry into the way that they approach your products? Is gender something that affects how people use your products? Is cultural background and language also something that comes in and affects the way that a user uses your product? For example, if you design something in English, do you also need the different translations? Um, and then you go into like the designing for different languages, of course. Um, and then of course, then you would also look at the user as part of the company. So are they, again, different roles within your business? Are they managers or bosses, or like are they just like junior staff? How much responsibilities do they have, and what do they need to carry out? What kind of actions are they empowered to make certain decisions, or do they need to do something and check with someone else before they can continue with their work? And lastly, okay, not lastly, also then, do they have any prior experience with your product or other similar competitor products? Does this affect the way that they would approach your product, right? For example, if you're designing a chatbot, then do they have experiences with other chatbots that might affect how they come and start using yours? Or even like similar brands as well. Um, and also lastly, the things like individual preferences, like whether they use desktop or mobile, which could be a generational thing. Like maybe certain people are more inclined towards using a desktop, certain people are more inclined towards using a mobile. But it could also be job related. So what we found out in some of our past projects is things like people like your CEO level, they're always the bosses they're always on the go, they're really busy. So they tend to use their mobile phone more to approve things on the go. They're looking at stuff on their phones a lot more. But then you have people like the admin executive, they are doing their work and therefore they're sitting in the office using their laptop, their desktop, and they have that huge screen space to do their work. So it also depends on what what they do, their responsibilities, how they are like in the company, and this can also affect how they use your product. So after talking about the different users who use your product, I think now what I want to talk about is how do you actually design your product for after considering all of these different elements. I'm going to make a big statement here, which is that because a lot of our users are doing their job, they generally have a higher tolerance for ugly design, especially if it's hyper functional. So a lot of the times when we've been testing our products, our B2B products with our users, they're always like, reduce the white space. Can you cram everything into this screen? Um, just put more information. I don't want to click. I don't want to scroll. And as a designer, it gets really frustrating because we put in the white space so that there's breathing room for us to understand pieces of data at once. We also follow like good UX principles to say, yeah, as when someone's going through a form, We want to make sure that they go through it. We want to guide them step by step. And then when you put it out with users, they're like, no, can you just put everything in one page? So there's this to- huge tolerance, but it also means that we should not ignore design aesthetics just because we say like, yeah, put everything in one page. So this is Power BI by Microsoft. I think it's a very typical product that a lot of business users love, mainly because the sheer amount of information you get within this one screen alone is so helpful to them. But visually, as a designer, I'm like, yeah, not really. It's a bit hard to understand. But then this is a lot of the kind of feedback that we get from a lot of users, right? If we listen to them entirely, this is the kind of product that we'll get. So rather than just listening purely to what our users are saying, I think at the end of the underlying message is that we want to help them. We want to make things neat, but we also want to help them get their job done. So on one hand, it also doesn't mean like I'm going to design something like whatever's on Dribble, lots of white space, looks beautiful, and then but you have like 50 pages for users to scroll through. So a few key learnings over the years for me is number one, don't cramp information, but also don't put in like unnecessary white space. Like just have enough to make sure that things look neat, but you don't need to put it into across like 50 screens. Secondly, I think as part of design aesthetics, especially for a lot of um a lot of those dashboards kind of designs or have tables and stuff like that, you always get very tempted to say that, okay, I'm gonna put in this little circle with a profile icon, and then my table is gonna look really nice because every little card has a different face right there with like different backgrounds, and people are gonna upload like really different pictures. And then the overall design looks really nice. But actually, for B2B, most people are not going to willingly upload their own profile picture. So the likelihood is you just get this colored avatar of their name and that's it. So and then lastly, I think the other thing that I learned along the way is that as a designer, we really love using charts for data. We like to make fancy graphs just in this for the sake of saying that look, we want to make this page look visually exciting. And we think it's a lot easier to understand. But actually, when we test it out with people who are doing their work, there are just some people who understand everything in a table. And they look at this Excel sheet and that is the one thing that they understand. You show them like a data chart, they're like, what does this mean? I don't want to click on it and look for the different, like how much money am I getting in January versus April. I don't want to see that trend line. I just look at the number and that actually helps me understand a lot better. So as designers, we all always fall into that trap of that. Yeah, we want to make it look nice, but sometimes people just really love looking at numbers and rather than looking beautiful. So overall, it comes back to this, right? Like we want to make things neat and but also help them to get their job done. I mean, not over designing, overdoing it, and making it too beautiful. And then the only people who love it are us when we look at our design and not the people who are actually using it. Um, but so on top of that, it just sounded like I'm pushing for usability a lot, right? But I think when validating our design, there's always this element of we want to make sure that it's usable. Our users can use it, they actually want to use it. And then we test for things like completion rates of performing a task. We do things like eye tracking or heat maps to make sure that, yeah, okay, everything's really easy for them to use. But I think on the other side of things, we also can test for emotional response. For example, we want to test like brand affinity, right? how much do they like your brand and want to come back to your brand later on. And you can do things like rating on a Likert scale or word cloud or get like direct feedback just to say that how how much do you enjoy using this product as well. So yes, it helps you get the job done, but just to elevate it and take it to the next step, you can then evaluate for their emotional response to your product and see that, okay, so maybe I'm an admin executive. I don't have a choice. I'm using this product because my bosses said that like this is the software that our company uses and I'm stuck with it. But if I had a choice, would I still pick this product? And if the answer is yes, then you know that, you know what, actually you designed a really good product. And but again, I think as part of B2B, um, I've talked a lot about like the different types of users and how they have different preferences, they have different responsibilities. Like what's really important is to make sure that you're testing the right part of your product with the right users. If I go back to talking about, say, a banking product, a banking app, logging in, it's really nice to say that, oh, you know what, let's do a dashboard on the home page so that you, um, whoever's logging in can see the trends of the money that's coming in, going out, how much your account, your business has in their banking account, that sort of thing. Um, and then obviously you have like the payment pages, that sort of thing. So the dashboard actually helps the business owners. It doesn't really help the finance executives who are creating the payments and going through the forms and keying in the information. And conversely, the payment forms are not helping. The CEOs are not the ones going through the payment pages. So just have to make sure that when you are testing with the a particular segment, a particular persona, make sure that that part of your product is targeted to them rather than for someone else. Because I think in one of our product testing before, we tested with the wrong user and then the I think it was an accountant was saying that, oh, the dashboard's useless, it's not very helpful to her. But actually because that's not part of her job scope and she didn't need to use it. So if we had listened to her feedback, we would have gone down the path of trying to re-edit and change the product to make sure that like, she was happy with it. But the lesson learned is that you test the correct portion with the correct user, and then that ensures that your product is well rounded and you've gotten the right feedback. So yeah, I think that's all that I have to share for today. Thank you for listening to me. I think I'll hand it over back to you, Sanchita or Harry.
Hi, thanks, Aiden. Thanks for the purposeful sharing. So, we had quite a few people joining us on actually about 100 over people, which I noticed last in live streaming. So, any questions from there or any questions here from those of you who've joined us on Zoom, please either share it on the chat or just unmute yourself and can ask the questions. Let me also check the live streaming if there's any questions over there. Harris, since I'm traveling, I'm not able to access the live streaming too much.
Yeah, no questions from the live streaming.
Okay. Any questions from any of you who's here in on this call?
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yeah, Eden, I have a question. So you are showing just now, you showed the bifocal diagram on how we should approach B2B and design for purpose. But at the same time, from the other part, we also have the double layer things from another business. So how does how do we come or how do we align both business part in terms of uh, their business aims? You know what I mean?
Not exactly.
So I'm trying to I try to articulate because designing
Yeah.
for B2B. So let's say I'm a business and I'm designing uh, for a product to be used by my users, which are another business.
Yeah.
So as a business, I have my business goal, and then my users, they have their own business goals.
Right.
How do we align these two goals through design?
Okay. So I think you're saying about like a B2B2B situation, right? Where I'm designing for a business that is also serving their own customers.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as some the first B as the business that is designing my customer, I think primarily first you are trying to design for your own customer, which is another business, right? So then you would also take into consideration what are their needs and what are they trying to achieve. For example, if I'm designing a SaaS product at software as a service, right? There are different kinds of software available, and we all just call them software as a service, but um, they would achieve a specific need, like an invoicing software, or for example, maybe like Adobe for businesses. And therefore, like you would also look at what is your business customer trying to achieve, what are they doing, and that that's part of your user needs, right? The jobs to be done. What are they trying to do? And then you design against that. But then of course that so you would look at that as your user or customer needs. And then you match it back against your own business needs, which is profit making, right? It's essentially whatever goals that you have as your own business, you have your profit making needs and directions that you want to go in. So you put that together and you see like, okay, so what are the ones that overlap and which ones should we focus on and then design against that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there is, I think, another question which has come in from Shomimi. What are some of the challenges you face frequently when designing for B2B or being part of the B2B project?
Okay. I think one of the biggest challenges is recruiting users for testing. Like, most especially if your product is for senior um senior level people in an organization. So for example, we've had a lot of I've been on quite a few projects where we do SMEs, and our target user is we have segments that target the CEOs of SMEs, and they are really, really difficult to catch because as SMEs, they are always strapped for time. And so trying to get even half an hour from them, it's really difficult to catch them. And then you need to kind of like try and make up for that time and compensate them. And that makes it really difficult. Yeah, then you don't actually get the feedback that you really need. So a lot of times what we do is like we try and speak with other like friends that we know and try to also absorb their way of approaching that business. Or yeah, like maybe it's through your CRM, yeah, sorry, not CRM, your customer relationship managers. Or sometimes you talk to the relationship managers in place of the actual customer. So, for example, in corporate banking, you can talk to the relationship managers because they talk to the CEOs a lot and they have a lot of insights on how they approach things, what are they concerned with, and you get your insights from them instead of the CEOs themselves. So I think that is honestly, one of the biggest challenges for designing or working in B2B projects, because at the end of the day, you're also trying to understand your customer. But if you can't speak with your customer, you can't catch them, then how do you get that insight that you need? Yeah. So innovating a lot of figuring a way around that. How else can you get the insight that you need? Maybe it's setting up a different format of feedback so that they can answer you in their own time, rather than always like a half an hour sit down on YouTube.
Okay, any other questions? One more question. What is the one of the best tricks for designers to align with stakeholders in a B2B context?
Right. Do you have any people in mind when you say stakeholder? Because I think it's not necessarily a B2B context, but just designers versus other stakeholders in general. I think one of the best things to do is listen to what they are actually looking for. And very often it's always aligned against your own business needs, like your own business goals of whichever profit making. Um, it always leads to generating revenue or acquiring customers, those sort of things, right? Even when you say you want to make onboarding process a lot smoother, there's a lot of money that they need to put into it, a lot of resources, a lot of software, hardware that they need to get hold of just to do that, right? So trying to convince them, it's um tying it back to that overall business goal that we should have. So if you can say that, okay, you know what, if I do XYZ, if we are trying to improve this portion of the onboarding journey, we want to change the landing page, and we need like 1 month of a team on it, but you will get these results of more customers acquired, more people will see it and land on the page, then that's a lot more convincing to help align with your stakeholder.
Thanks, Eden. There's one more question from Fang, which is, should B2B always facing B as a business? Any cases that they are Cs like we usually face as well? Any tips on how we should design for them? I'm not sure. Do you mean like whether it's B2B or B2C, or I'm not sure, Eden. Did you get this question?
I kind of understood it the same way. Like, is it B2B versus B2C design? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Fang, if you're in the I guess you're in the Zoom call. Would you like to unmute and just ask the question? Okay, yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
right. So I think whether they are similar, I think again, as I've said, right, it's pretty different because for B2B, your users tend to be, they're not doing things for themselves. Like in a B2C context, there's a lot of like, do I want to buy this product? Do I want to sign up for Figma and pay for it? Or do I want to pay for Adobe? And then that's a lot of um direct marketing effort to convince you that, hey, you should buy my product. Whereas in a B2B context, you're not asking the designer whether they should pay for it. You're asking the designer to convince their company to pay for it. So then the real people that you are trying to convince are, say, like the purchasing department or the bosses who are going to say that, yes, let's invest in this.
that's
Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Does it answer your question, Fang? Okay, so there's another question from China, who says, curious about what constraints do you typically deal with when working on B2B projects, and also do you have any tips on how you manage them, especially when there are constraints on time? I think you mentioned about the recruiting of the users for
Yeah.
feedback, yeah, and anything else.
I think on the other end, it's the researching of other products. For example, like when we start designing a product, we start by looking at other products in the market that are also doing the same thing. Right? You want to research your competitors a little bit. And the problem is that you need to have a business ID to start searching for that. So if it's a B2C product, I think then it's up to you to say that, okay, I'm going to use my own email, my own phone number to sign up for things. But generally, when they're trying to get into a business product, like you want to sign up for a B2B product, and then you're like, okay, now I need to give business credentials. I think in Singapore, then we have like the whole SingPass, My Info, right? And for personal, like B2C products, you just use your own personal SingPass. But when it comes to using a business SingPass, like that's where you get stuck. So then your research kind of stops at one point and you cannot really complete it. So then I think it's also just trying to be smart around like how much info you can get hold of. And then once you're stuck at that certain point, are there other ways to find things? Like, for example, if I'm researching an onboarding flow, then and I get stuck halfway, what if I go through things like YouTube tutorials, or sometimes they have like marketing demos, that sort of thing that you can find. I think at one point we even found an ex-product designer who did a case study of her product. So we were looking through her portfolio and that case study just to see like, okay, maybe there are some learnings you can take away from this. Like, what are some issues that users are facing? We sort of reference that as well. So just get a bit creative around how you need to discover information. And then when it comes to doing the actual design, I think a lot of it is once you already understand the insights and constraints that you have of what your users need, then it's just the rest of it is a design process.
Thanks, Eden. I don't think any other questions. Just one question. Okay. Oh, yeah. So, as a designer, what kind of research do you typically conduct to gain a better understanding of the business you'll be designing for? Yeah, that's another question for you.
Right. So I think this goes a bit more into the overall design process. I think there's the types of research there are. It's dependent on what your product is trying to achieve, and then it goes into like there's qual research, quant research, and the different steps that you need to take. Right. Some of it, I would say, it depends on the priorities of what you're trying to deliver. Often, I would say the most basic one is things like you audit any existing products that you already have for any current issues. If you have access to things like data analytics, basically try and understand your current situation, like what's good, what's bad about existing products, or if the product doesn't exist, about the current process. What is it that led to this need for this product, right? And then you look at the landscape, look at other people, other businesses. And I would say the last aspect is actually understanding your own business goal. Like, why are you trying to develop this product in the first place? If you're redesigning your own company website, then what is it trying to do? What is it trying to achieve as well? What kind of conversions are you trying to drive towards?
Thank you. I think no other questions for now. I think there was a general question which I did not put in over here, but it was from somebody in Lazada. Is that do you have any inputs on our design? And uh, the Lazada app. Yeah. So please feel free if you want to take this question, because I know it's a bit sensitive question. So yeah, you can also avoid it if you want to.
I honestly don't use Lazada that often. Again, I don't shop a lot in general on e-commerce platforms. So I don't think I want to comment on anything just in case it's outdated or yeah.
Okay, that's a diplomatic one. Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think this bifocal framework is something which we are using for profiling our sellers as well, because a seller is both a business and a user at the same time. In the sense, like they are a business and an individual at the same time, meaning they're representing a business, and they are also an individual who is, perhaps some of them are from within the same business or within the same business type. They may be somebody who is a younger age group or an older age group, or have a different role within the same business type. So yeah, we are profiling, we are doing a study, in fact, right now as we speak. So we are using a very similar framework where we do profiling based on business types and the individual within the business, what is their type, because that also impacts the the profiling. Yeah, so very much in sync with what our thought process also. So yeah, but thank you so much. Any other questions from live streaming, or any other questions? Otherwise, we've just gone 3 minutes over time, and we will like to thank Eden and thank all of you. And thanks for joining us, and thanks, Eden, for supporting this initiative, and thanks for this lovely sharing. Then we will end the session now. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Eden.
Thank you.